What is dual intent and is it acceptable under the immigration law? Before I answer these questions, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and enable notifications. Dual intent means that you have applied for immigration to Canada and then you also apply for a temporary stay in Canada. You may ask, what is temporary stay? Temporary stay means that you want to visit Canada as a temporary visitor, like a tourist, like somebody who wants to perform in a theatrical act, or you are a business visitor. And also, you may think about flight crews, etc., etc. What about workers? A foreign worker or international worker is somebody who comes to Canada to work on a temporary basis. So they may stay in Canada for a few days or a few weeks or a few months or maybe a couple of years, but eventually at the end of their work in Canada, they need to leave Canada. The third group of temporary residents in Canada are international students. These are people who register to our high schools or colleges or universities or primary schools, and they want to stay in Canada on a temporary basis to learn English language or French language or other options of study in Canada. And eventually, when their studies are over, they want to go back home. These are the groups of temporary stay in Canada. What about immigration? When you immigrate to Canada, you intend to become a permanent resident of Canada. It means that you want to call Canada home and stay here. And eventually, for most permanent residents, you want to become a Canadian citizen. When you apply for immigration to Canada, under Section 22, Sub 2 of the Immigration Act, you may also apply for temporary stay to Canada. An immigration officer cannot refuse your temporary stay application solely because you already have applied for permanent residency. However, you need to keep in mind that when you apply for temporary stay to Canada, then an immigration officer looks into certain sections of the immigration regulations. For visitors, they look at Section 179 and especially subsection B. For students, they look at Section 216 and especially subsection B. And for workers, they look at several sections of the regulations, but especially Section 200, subsection B. Under those subsections, the officer needs to be satisfied that by the end of your stay in Canada, you won't illegally stay in Canada and you will leave Canada. You may get confused and say, if I have applied for immigration to Canada and I already say to the immigration officer my intention is to stay here forever, then how can I apply for a temporary stay and convince the officer that my intention is not to stay forever? Let me give you an example. So let's say your children are Canadian citizens and they have sponsored you to Canada. Now, you are waiting for the results of that sponsorship application. However, you also want to visit them to Canada for a period of a couple of months because you missed them. If you apply for a visit visa to Canada and come and stay within those 2 months, you need to convince the officer that by the end of 2 months, you will go back home regardless of the results of your permanent residency application. So maybe while you are here, your permanent residency application continues to be processed and then you go back home, you won't overstay. Or maybe you get refused, and even if you get refused, you won't overstay. This is the major difference. The same thing is about students and workers. You need to stick with the plan for your work permit or study permit. You cannot breach whatever you have promised to the immigration officer regardless of your permanent residency application. And if the officer is convinced that you won't breach whatever you have promised for your temporary stay in Canada, then they cannot refuse your temporary stay application because you have already applied for permanent residency. The key is Section 22, Sub 2 of the Immigration Act. Thank you very much for watching this video. My name is Parsai. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. I also teach immigration consulting at Ashton College. I'm the author of 88 Tips on Immigration to Canada. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel, enable notifications. I promise that we will have more educational videos and news about immigration to Canada. See you soon.